Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Jess from Fourth and Birch. Today we're going to talk about an Epoxy Swirl beach tumbler. So just a bit of an introduction. There are numerous ways to swirl a tumbler, whether it's alcohol inks or glitter or tinted resins. And also there are numerous ways to put glitter on a tumbler, and this is the method we're going to use. It's a bit of a flood coat, and also we are going to use a bunch of different glitters from preferably the same place, or at the very least we need the exact same size glitter, so the same cut, because we don't want any one glitter showing or sticking out more than another glitter. So these are all extra fine glitter. And let's talk about all of the colors and the brand that I'm using. So here they are in approximately the order that I'm going to use them in. We want to mix them up a little bit so they give us a swirl, but they are all the same brand. They are Recollections. You can find this at Michael's. You can find them online at Michael's. You can see there's a sprinkle area or an open area that you can use. And the reason that I like using these is that they're somewhat inexpensive. They go on sale a lot, and unfortunately with this method there's not an easy way to collect what you used at the bottom and put it back in the bottles. So it does use a little more glitter than maybe some of the other projects that you're used to. Alright, so let's talk about our colors. Alright, the 5 browns that I use, the first one here is gold. Next one is champagne. This one in the middle is copper. The next one is amber, and the next brown is chestnut, and these will all be listed in the comments as well. So let's move on to kind of our greenish blues. The first one is mist, middle one is mint, and the third one is paradise. So now we're kind of transitioning into blues, so let's look at the lighter blues, and out of these 3, the first one, this is peacock. The next one is cornflower. And this third one here is ocean. And then for my last 2, a little more true blue, this one is sky blue. And this last dark one is called marine. So there you have it for the colors. Again, they'll be listed in the comments for you, and you'll see how we swirl them together. So let's get to the fun part. Alright everybody, so I am just finishing mixing up my SwiftPoxy from Tumblerpoxy. So this is a fast setting epoxy, so I do have to work somewhat quickly with this. I don't have a ton of work time. So what we're going to do is put on a flood coat of this, which means a thick coat, thicker than you would normally put for most things. And then we are going to add our glitters. So if you've ever added a base layer of glitter to a cup when you've done the epoxy the epoxy method where you get it super thin and then add your glitter to that, if you've ever seen when you have a little patch of the cup that had a little more glitter, or I'm sorry, a little more epoxy on that area, you may have noticed that the glitter looked different. It looked almost matte colored, a little less sparkly, like it was laying flatter, just less glittery. And that's because, again, it's when you're doing a super thin layer of epoxy just to adhere your glitter, you are using the epoxy just for adhesive. But if you have a pretty decent puddle of epoxy, it's almost like having a dirt road with puddles. The dirt's going to look different in the drier areas versus the puddle areas, right? The dirt's going to lay differently. It's going to look wetter and anyway, less powdery, less, I don't know. So anyway, those little areas are actually what we're shooting for here. We want a decent amount of epoxy. So this is a 20-ounce skinny, and I am adding 25 mils of epoxy to this. turn this a little bit, turn my table. Sorry, the camera's gonna wobble. So I am adding 25 mils of epoxy. And it's gonna look like a lot. It is a lot. It's definitely not what I would typically add for, say, cover, you know, a layer over a decal or, you know, something like that. But you will see what happens when we start putting our glitters on. So we talked earlier about the beach colors that we're going to use for the glitter. What I did on this tumbler is I have another video on YouTube that shows how I typically put spray paint on tumblers like this, when really I'm going to cover this all up. Like, this is not perfect by any means. There's all these splotches. However, if there's a little bit of tumbler that ends up peeking through my glitter, like if I don't get my glitter fully coating the tumbler, I do not want the stainless steel tumbler underneath showing up. So we're going to make sure we get every little area of the tumbler, and then we're going to try to spread this out a little bit, almost like spreading jelly, because it's quite thick. I'm not going to pop any bubbles. I don't care about those right now. All the Tumblerpoxy products are pretty good at popping their own bubbles anyway, so that's not typically something I have to worry about too much. Alright, so got my bottom. Alright, everything looks good. So I'm not going to tell you what colors I'm using. They're just the ones that we have discussed earlier. But I'm going to start with my browns, and I had 5 of them. So my first thing that I'm going to do is just try to get the bottom of this, because that's the hardest area to get without lifting my pan up. Now, the unfortunate part about this technique is that there's really not a great way, unless you want to keep changing your underneath thing here, and if you had time, but there's not a great or an easy way, at least for me, because maybe I'm just impatient, to save your glitters. So this does use a decent amount of glitter, and I don't scoop it up and put it back in the bottles. So I'm going to start doing my glitters. I'm going to ultimately need to cover the whole tumbler in them. I like to do a piece of long glitter there. I like to do kind of lines of glitter to make it look a little beachy. I'm opening these up to this open area as well to make sure I get full coverage wherever my glitter gets put down. And you can kind of maybe see it's sinking into the epoxy. One second here. This really long piece of glitter didn't get cut correctly, so we don't want that in there. So you can see the glitter kind of falling down into the epoxy and laying pretty flat. That's ultimately what we're going for. Now this is a swirl tumbler, so we are going to try to swirl some of these colors later. However, We don't just want to blob it on like that if we can help it. Okay, I think I have all of my browns done, so I'm going to set them aside. I can certainly always come back to them. All right, now I'm going to kind of move into my greens. And I'm going to do the same thing. Ooh, that was a big glob. Again, wasteful, and it doesn't flow very well on your tumbler, so. I would have more time with this if I was using a slower setting epoxy. But I like to use my SwiftPoxy. Gets my projects done faster. I can move on to the next step faster. Tapping my thing here, I put another kind of big glob of the glitter. Mostly done with my greens. I'm going to come into more of my blues. And sometimes with this painted bottom, with the painted base, it's hard to tell actually where you have glitter and where you don't, which I guess is a good thing because it means I did a pretty good job. Alright, now I'm into my darker blues, my two last colors. I'm going to try to fill in any holes that I might have, but I also, like, this is a pretty big area here that doesn't have any glitter. I don't know if I'm going to be able to cover that with just my last two glitters. I might need to bring up one of my previous ones, but we'll see. Alright, here's our dark one. I usually open this to the sprinkle side first, and I work on getting my entire, my rim at the top. Get that first to make sure I have coverage. And then once I'm happy with that, the dark kind of goes a long way, so probably going to leave this in sprinkle mode for now. Oops, I bumped into my epoxy there. That was not good, but it'll be okay. Right there, got a little bump. Alright, I'm going to do a final look, make sure there's nowhere that I missed that has zero glitter. Oh, there's zero right there. Although if there are areas like that, it will likely get fixed in the next step here. Alright. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so this is a very important step. We're going to take away our powder underneath, put that on a separate table, because here comes the heat and we don't want to blow that everywhere. So we're going to use my heat gun. We're going to use pretty high heat. I have mine turned up all the way, and I'm not going to heat this up a huge amount. I'm going to go little by little, but I want this to start moving. So once everything kind of starts moving a little bit, we are going to tip our tumbler. You can see it. You can see it already. And this might drip onto your workspace underneath, and that's okay. But what we want are these colors to not just swirl this way on the tumbler, we want them to start swirling down into each other. You can kind of see it here. It almost looks like crepey skin. If you can see that, that'll sort itself out. You can see it starting to kind of thicken and drip. Pretty soon here, some's going to drip onto my bottom a little more to bring a few more of these colors onto my bottom. Go back. If you need to add more heat, add a little more heat. That is okay. There I did not heat my bottom. I'm going to do that quick. There we go. Now you can start seeing things swirl down and into other colors. And that's what we were looking for. Dripping off, that's okay. I don't want to tip it too far. My beach is coming up pretty far into my blue, so I'm not going to go too much more. And that is really it. So this will continue to self-level. I try not to add any more glitter if I don't have to after I've done this whole heating thing, because after doing all this, it doesn't sink into the cup or into the epoxy very well. But there is, like I said, kind of this matte look about it that if you put fresh glitter on top, then it's going to be sticking up and looking more glitter-like. But I'm just going to let this spin, since this is a fast-setting epoxy, 3 hours maybe, and that's really all I need to do. If you have some areas at the very top that don't look wet enough, so what that means is I have glitter right here, but it looks like dry glitter. It does not look like it's soaked into the epoxy. I'm going to grab a little more of my clear epoxy and wait for it to come around again. Actually, we're going to go back here. Something too that I didn't do a whole lot, but when you're heating it, you can go back and forth and turn your tumbler going the opposite direction if you have that option. But on my rim here, I'm just going to pat down some clear epoxy. So this stuff starts looking a lot wetter. Here's that spot right there. Because I really don't want to sand any of my glitter once this is dry before my next coat. Because a lot of glitter isn't the color that it looks like all the way through. Oftentimes it's just coated in a specific color. And if you sand it, it will all of a sudden, instead of like right here, instead of being blue, it might be silver in the middle of each little piece of glitter. So I really don't want to take that chance. So I don't want all this glitter standing up. So I added glitter to my rim, or I'm sorry, I added epoxy to the rim. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of heat just so this starts moving around my cup. Perfect, and that will just end up blending right in with everything else. So that is it. We're going to let this spin, and then we will see what this looks like in a few hours. All right, so here we are after we've put this is just them after being swirled. I'm going to take them out. I'm going to take some of this outside just to show you in better lighting. I have my heat lamp above me here, so it's a little yellowish. And just not the greatest lighting, but there is something here. I want to talk about the importance of painting your tumblers like we did beforehand. So remember, it was kind of just splotchy all over the place, you know, some gold down here, some lighter blue in the greens in here, and some darker up here. But when you're doing swirls, you know, and you're tipping your tumbler back and forth, trying to get these nice swirls in here, you're pushing your epoxy around, you're pushing your glitter around, or your, you know, whatever you're using for your color, your alcohol ink, paints, whatever. And so the importance of really doing a decent job with your undercoat, and when I mean decent job, I don't mean it doesn't have to be perfect, beautiful, blended, ombre, any of that, but you want to, again, we had gold down here, knowing that's where our browns were going to be. You know, we moved up this way and threw a little bit of the greens in here. Made point of having more of the dark blues up here and a little mixed in. But I'm going to zoom in here. And this did not pick up, or my glitter did not stay here much. So a lot of what you're seeing, not all of it, some of it's glitter, but some of that is actually my paint underneath, and you can see maybe a little bit here. It looks a little more paint splotch sprayish. So you have the light blue underneath. This is where one of the dark blue, the royal blue, kind of came and spattered here. And there's still glitter on top of it. It's not bare. You can kind of see the greenish glitter there, but this glitter was a little more transparent, so not only can you see through it a little more, but it also moved around, so we lost a bit of it. And it looks just fine. So take a little bit of time to think about or buy a couple extra spray paint colors and throw those on first. So if you do have things like this, or for instance, I don't have one here, but when I do my flame tumblers with alcohol ink, I spray the bottom mostly yellow. Sometimes I'll throw a little bit of orange, although that's typically not a color spray paint that I have on hand. But if I do, I will. But for sure, to put a nice kind of a goldish yellow underneath. So when I do have stuff that happens like this, where my alcohol inks kind of separate and don't have much color to them, you can see the yellow underneath, but you would be none the wiser. Something too that I want to mention, this is a beach cup that I've done, same method as these, but this one used holographic glitters, and it's hard to see here, but pretty much all you see is the holographic. There's a bit of swirl in there too, but it is hard to see it because the holographic, the rainbowness of your holographic glitters kind of takes over. So if you hold this back, you can see better, but I think you lose the swirls that you'd have with non-holographics, and you see this cup and you see, woo, rainbow bling, which again is okay if that's what you want. For these cups, that's not what I wanted. But so just picking your glitter can make a big difference on what the final cup looks like. So all right, let's go outside and get a little better idea as to what some of these look like. All right, I'm outside so I can get a little bit better natural light here. So this is one of the tumblers. After we put the glitter on. So this is still, it's actually fairly smooth. Not smooth enough to put a decal on, but with the way that the glitters kind of soak into the epoxy, it actually leaves a pretty smooth finish. I do still have to clean up my rim, but that's pretty easy to do. But yeah, so here's the swirls. It's actually maybe too much light. There we go. And there is, like I said, a little bit of a muted or a dullness to the glitter. It's not as flashy because, again, when it soaks kind of into the epoxy and lays down in there, it lays down a little flatter, not to the extent of like a tack it method kind of thing, but it is a really nice, like a muted sparkle. All right, and then this is one that I have put a coat of epoxy on, so it was that, like that there first. I didn't actually have to sand anything down. Oh, actually, I think I did. Maybe a little bit right here it gets a little rough, so I sanded a tiny bit. But remember, your glitter might not be like this glitter might not be brown on the inside of it, so you don't want to sand too much and all of a sudden have a silver line at the bottom of your cup. So that's really all I did, is a tiny bit of sanding there. I'm going to end up putting a decal on this anyway with somebody's name on it, so it's going to get another coat of epoxy anyway, but it's already pretty smooth. There's a few spots that I could maybe sand out a little bit, but so this gives it a little more of a shiny look with the epoxy, but still it's not quite as shimmery. I guess maybe shimmery is the word. It's not quite as glittery, as blingy as some of the other glitter tumblers. So there you have it. These are the Epoxy Swirl beach tumblers. You don't have to do beach tumblers, you can do any color swirl. It's just important, like we talked about earlier, a few things to remember. You definitely want glitters that are the same size, the same cut. You don't want some of it chunky, some of it fine. And in these tumblers, I kind of feel like the more colors, the better. You know, you really get this mixture of a lot of different colors, and I like that. So there you are. If you have any questions, please put those in the comments. And I appreciate you joining me for this journey. We will see you next time.